A couple of months ago, the author J.K. Rowling came under scrutiny for denying Nazi crimes on Twitter, and because I know there are some of you who'll think that I'm making that up or exaggerating, I'll put the tweet in question up on screen now so you can read it yourself. I'll be unpacking this more in just a minute, but the important thing to know is that, to my knowledge at the time of writing, J.K. Rowling has not backed down or retracted this statement. Now, this isn't necessarily going to be a video about Rowling or this situation specifically, but rather I want to use this as an entry point into a broader topic that is far more significant in my view, which is the selective manner in which the media choose to report on gender-critical activists and the importance of honesty and good faith discourse. The Institute for Sexualwissenschaft, or Institute for Sexual Research, was an organisation in Germany which conducted a lot of valuable, early pioneering research into sexuality and gender identity. It was founded by Magnus Hirschfeld, a Jewish physician and advocate for LGBTQ rights, and in 1933 it was subject to one of the very first Nazi book burnings when it was raided by students and members of the SA, and the entire contents of its library were destroyed, an event which is considered to have set research on the subject back significantly. And this definitely happened. It is undisputed by historians. I'll put a link up to a video by Colleen Conrad which goes into more detail and provides citations, but this is what the original tweet is referring to, and what J.K. Rowling is describing as a fever dream in her reply. And to reiterate, Rowling has made no retraction of this statement, but rather instead has attempted to shift the goalposts and reframe the conversation into a more generalised debate about whether or not transgender people suffered under the Nazi regime, which honestly is a whole other subject with a lot of nuance to it. The short answer is yes, trans people were targeted to varying degrees by the Nazis, but that isn't the point. By claiming this book burning did not take place, Rowling is denying a Nazi war crime. It might not technically count as Holocaust denial, but I hope I shouldn't have to explain why denying anything the Nazis did is still very messed up and harmful. Now, although I said that some of you watching may struggle to believe Rowling would do that, to those who have actually been paying attention to her progression over the last few years, it should not come as any great surprise. In the context of discourse on trans people, Rowling is mainly known for her essay that she wrote back in 2020 that was nominated for an award by the BBC, and several tweets she made around the same time in which she claimed to know and love trans people. I actually did an analysis of one of those tweets not so long ago explaining why it was still harmful and misleading. Anyone who has been following Rowling's online activities since then, though, will know that she has become increasingly radicalised and unhinged over time, taking every opportunity to swipe at the trans community while supporting and associating with organisations and individuals who are openly transphobic. And by openly transphobic, I mean saying things like trans people are a huge problem to a sane world, which is a direct quote from Helen Joyce, pictured alongside Rowling in this photo. FYI, many of the other people in this photo have said equally bigoted things. Then there's the likes of Kelly J. Keane, who has stated multiple times that she thinks trans women are just predatory men with fetishes. Not some trans women, that's all trans women. Again, these are people whom Rowling openly supports and will not have one bad word to say about. Perhaps most notably, Rowling has even shown endorsement towards Matt Walsh, who is not only transphobic but anti-abortion. So nice work there for someone who claims to be standing for women's rights. But all of this comes back to the main point of this video, which is the importance of good faith discourse. Council of Geeks, in her response video, which I highly recommend you go watch, said at one point that she is a consequentialist and whether someone is being sincere or not does not matter to her. However, I would beg to differ and argue that sincerity and intentions do very much matter, because if everyone was being honest, then the whole trans debate would not be happening. This may seem like a radical idea, but it is actually possible for someone to be bigoted and still have conversations in good faith. It's just that for the most part they tend to be very short conversations because they would go something like this. Hi, I'd just like to share my opinion that I hate trans people, or insert X-minority group here, and I wish they didn't exist. Oh, well that's kind of awful and hateful, remind me not to invite you to any of my parties. Presenting your bigotry in this manner does not tend to win over the masses though, and transphobes know this, which is why they lean so hard into the notion that they are speaking up for women's rights, or fairness in sport, or protecting children. It's all a deception technique intended to make hatred sound more palatable by repackaging packaging it as something else, and the sad thing is, it works. It's also the reason why the response to Emma Watson speaking up about trans rights was so vicious and outraged, because, you know, when you're claiming to represent women's rights and someone who is an outspoken feminist objects to your movement, then it rather breaks the illusion. What I really want to emphasise is that the media are complicit in this deception, and not just right-wing media, I mean all mainstream news outlets. Case in point, here is an official tweet from the BBC claiming that trans people are protesting a quote-unquote women's rights event. The person pictured in the photo is Kelly J. Keane, who you might remember I mentioned earlier in this video. She's the one who thinks all trans women are men with fetishes. She is also claimed to not be a feminist, and her rallies frequently attract far right-wing attendees who are openly anti-abortion, as well as fascists and basically all the worst sort of people you can imagine. So yeah, women's rights is definitely what this is all about. Now you might be wondering why a supposedly neutral organisation like the BBC would have an interest in misrepresenting transphobia. Well, you see, the media want the moral panic about transgender people to keep going, because outrage sells newspapers, and that is ultimately all that matters. The Carolyn Lowbridges of the world, they know exactly what they are doing. They also know that if your average person sees that J.K. Rowling, one of the main figureheads driving the gender-critical movement, has gone so far off the rails that she is literally engaging in Nazi crime denial, then the moral panic might just start to lose credibility. And that's the reason why this isn't getting reported. Because considering the amount of coverage Rowling normally gets in the media, you would think that her denying Nazi crimes should really be a major news event. But no, this whole situation has received next to no mainstream coverage, because for the news outlets it's not convenient. They want the general public to stay ignorant. They want Rowling and activists like her to be seen as just people who are under attack for asking questions or standing up for women's rights. Remember, the outrage train needs to keep going, no matter what consequences and suffering are inflicted as a result. And make no mistake, there are real-world consequences to all this. And no, I don't mean people's feelings getting hurt. The last few years have seen numerous bills being put forward in the States directly targeting trans individuals, particularly with regard to access to gender-affirming care. Perhaps most notably in Texas, simply being a parent of a young trans person can now result in you being branded as a child abuser and having your kids taken away from you by authorities. And there have already been proposals to introduce similar legislation in the UK, such as the Liz Truss bill that would have attempted to stop young people from socially transitioning, something which would not just affect trans people, but the expression of cisgender individuals as well. The reason why politicians are doing this is because they know the environment is becoming increasingly hostile toward the LGBTQ community. Moral panics do cause tangible suffering, and so when news organisations are knowingly complicit in misrepresentation and promoting these bad faith narratives, they inflict real-world damage. That's why it's not enough simply to combat the rhetoric. When transphobes talk about protecting women's spaces or safeguarding children, we also need to call out the dishonesty and make it clear who is pushing this rhetoric and where it is coming from. I'm Midnight, and I just lost my train of thought.